last section of Blink, we read 2 chapters, and it's the 7 Seconds in the Bronx, and the conclusion is listening with your eyes. And so in the 7 Seconds in the Bronx chapter, it starts with a story about Amado Diallo, who's a guy from Guinea, and a group of 4 police officers see him on the street in the Bronx after midnight and make a instinctive judgment that he's up to no good. And they chase him through a building and start firing at him because they think he's pulling a gun from his pocket. And so in the end, Diallo died after this, and Gladwell goes to talk about the mistakes that the police officers made. And the first one is that they couldn't read his mind and instantly thought he looked suspicious. They misread his curiosity and thought it was like brazenness, and they saw him reach for his pocket and thought that he must be dangerous and he's pulling out a gun, even though it was actually him pulling out his wallet. So then it goes to talk about the reason why these mind reading failures happen, and it's normally because of stress and adrenaline. When your heartbeat is from 115 to 145 beats per minute, it improves your performance for things, but your brain starts shutting down at 175 beats per minute and higher. And when that happens, the front part of your brain that makes like good decisions shuts down, and then all decision making is done by the middle part of your brain, which is like your animalistic responses, so fight and flight. So your brain does not want to work anymore. And so when that happens, you can't read situations. And it discusses a story of a man named Peter who is autistic, and when he can't read people like most people can. And so it talks about how when our heart rate is that high, we lose our ability and are effectively like read people like autistic people do. Then in the conclusion, it talks about a lady named Abby Conant, who's a professional trombone player, and when it was a blind audition, the conductor immediately wanted her to be in the orchestra. But once they realized she was a girl, they judged her because of their like predetermined beliefs on that women can't play as well as men can. And so that whole section is just on how we need to be more blind to things that won't lead our unconscious biases astray.
Okay. So the sentence I had was arousal leaves us mind blind, and the sentence is talking about when like the relationship between like the autistic mind and like making decisions in like stressful situations, or just like where important information like isn't recognized. And I thought the words mind blind from that sentence were really interesting, because in the book it talks about how like when you're mind blind, it means that you're not able to recognize or make connections with the objects, informations, and people around you. And I don't know, I think that's super important, because if we can't like recognize the information around us, then we're gonna make bad decisions, and like we won't be able to see like the bigger picture. And like for the reflection, when I was reading this section, it kind of just made me think of like when we're racing, because like like you were talking about, when your heart rate gets like above 175, you don't really recognize the things around you and run race. Like I never hear anyone. Or it's kind of just like I made a connection between that, and I just know that like when I'm in really stressful situations, I like don't make very good choices, or just like don't really pay attention to the more important information. So I was kind of just thinking that I want to like practice gathering information and like staying calm in stressful situations so that I can not be mind blind and just make good decisions. But yeah.
So my sentence was, but now we know more. We know that what we see, particularly when it is the color of someone's skin or gender or age, does not always aid in understanding. So in this part of the text, Malcolm Gladwell, he's like explaining how our unconscious mind can sometimes like overcomplicate the information, and that leads to like more confusion. And so he explains that sometimes like less information is better because it just like leads to a better decision making overall. And he is also talking about how sometimes our biases can get in the way of like the good and bad decisions that we make. So just one thing that sticks out is when he says that like seeing more doesn't always aid in understanding, because I feel like we associate like our sight with like being able to perceive and like gather the information that we need, but sometimes that's like it's like too much and it's just like causes for more confusion. And how that kind of relate this to me is when I try to make decisions, I like tend to overthink things a lot because I don't want to like make a wrong decision and I don't want to like mess it all up. So I try to like go over this could change it, even though sometimes it's like too much information. It's just like making the decision harder. So I think I could like try to like factor out some of the unnecessary like factors and help make my decisions easier. And then it says like what action am I going to take, and one thing I could do is like I'm trying to identify like the biases that I have and try to find ways that like to like get around those or to like avoid them so that they're not affecting my decisions. We did like a test in psychology yesterday, which is weird because it's like goes exactly with this, but we did like a bias test and we could like choose, and I like have a bias for young people over old people, which is like weird to me, but just like stuff like that I guess I could like try to avoid. So
yeah, mine actually goes a lot along with yours, like making decisions. My phrase was, this is an old guy with a lot of risk factors who's having chest pain. I'm not going to trust the ECG. And so it's from like back in the doctor section when they're trying to decide like the doctor's just like reactions to patient symptoms versus what like the EKG is telling them. And like the way that I kind of interpret it is it's like picking the lesser of the two evils, because both aren't like, it's not like they're evil. An EKG isn't evil, a doctor's not evil. But it's just the fact that both are not 100% certain like future tellings of what's going to happen. And so you just have to go with the one, well, you kind of have to like make a decision which one you want to pick, which one seems more reliable, and sometimes you got to pick the safer option. And so the doctor is going to trust like his instincts and like not his, but like his or her, like just what they think will be the best for the patient in the long run. And so so like that, so in like the reflection part, that kind of speaks to me, because well, we get a lot of times when like information is telling us two exactly different things to do, and you just don't know what to do, because like sometimes you'll have like homework you need to get done, but then you also have like friends that want to go hang out, and like I don't know about you guys, but science is like you should go like spend time with your friends. Like social interaction is good, but it's also like schoolwork is also important, and so you need to like find a balance between the two, or like pick one or the other. And obviously like homework needs to get done, but it's just an example. And so my invitation is just that like even when stuff is fighting, just like trying to make the most informed decision possible, and just to pick the lesser of two evils, or the one that will be least detrimental later.
Yeah. Like that. My sentence, it didn't fit all in here because it's like a long sentence, so I'm gonna read it from the book.
But it says, the presence of contempt in a marriage can even predict such things as how many colds a husband or wife gets. In other words, having someone you love express contempt toward you is so stressful that it begins to affect the function of your immune system. I thought that was really interesting. I mean, that was from weeks ago when we like read the beginning of the book, so I had to kind of like go back and like read the context again to like remember like what was going on. But basically it's happening when they're taking like the love lab or whatever, and he's noticing like he's able to like thin slice like what is going on, and he's like he can guess what's going on in this couple's relationship very accurately just based on like certain things that he tries to focus on, and the main one is contempt. And he like talks about how it's not gender specific, but that like he discusses how like contempt can be so stressful to the other partner that we may even cause them to be sick. And so that's what like John Gottman talked that like the like our like unconscious behaviors like can have like a physical effect on people, and we don't even like realize it, especially like in a relationship that like appears to be like loving, and like it probably is like they probably like really do love each other because I mean they're married, but also like what's like also affecting their marriage and their relationship that they don't like consciously realize. And like contempt can be a big factor to like how like your relationship like lasts like through divorce, or like even physically like with colds. Like if your wife gets colds all the time, like does it have to do with because you like show contempt against her all the time and you don't like even realize it? And then like the metaphor of this like was the use of the word contempt, because contempt is like anger or like disregard or like you know what I mean, and that's usually not something that you expect to like notice a ton in like a newlywed marriage, you know. So it's just interesting that like we think these things and like act this way and don't even realize that we're doing it, and other people usually don't even realize that we're doing it. Like this man has studied these things for years, and like he's gotten really good at being able to like thin slice and notice certain things. And so then for me, it just like made me wonder like what like do I show that I don't even realize? Maybe other people don't realize, but like that's like affecting like my relationships. Like do I show contempt against people and like not even realize it? Because it's kind of like you think of yourself on like a higher level than other people, and like do I think of myself that way without like even like because like consciously I don't think it's right. You know, it just like makes I think it's interesting that like you know you don't realize that you do these things, but like it makes you think, do I do this or do I do that? And like how do you fix that? You know, and so then like when it said like what action are we going to take, I was thinking like it talked about how like our environment sort of affects how we thin slice. So like what are we surrounding ourselves with that like help us to better like understand like our unconscious and make like better decisions and like improve the way we act. Like I don't know necessarily what you would like surround yourself with to like lessen like your feelings of contempt if you don't even realize you have them. But like maybe like looking into that and discovering like what you could do just so you can have like healthier and happier relationships in the future. Yeah, anyways, that's
Cool. Mine was kind of totally different from that because it was in the packaging section where they talked all about food. And it says, you just ask them which tastes better, and by that indirect method, you get a picture of what their true motivations are. So this is right after they're telling a story about margarine, where they made it yellow, and then they added it into gold foil, and then people were buying it all the time. And I think the word picture was really important in this quote because they are saying that you're getting a picture of what the people are thinking when they're buying it. And I think that's important because a picture is a general idea, not the entire story, and that's what you can be understanding. You're not going to know the entire reason why someone's buying that thing of margarine, but you can get an idea on why they're buying it because of using the packaging. The reflection section, I said, no, it was really impressed at how much you can learn or improve a product by only changing a small part of it, and I think I could apply it to myself because there's a lot of times where you can, I don't know, it sounds kind of weird, but you can get results for things you want based off of how you present yourself. So I think an invitation could be just be aware of how you can present yourself. So your packaging makes people want to do what you were wanting the result to be.
I liked what you said about like how like the people didn't know why they were like buying it, like exactly, but like they knew they were, so they like changed things about it. And one of my questions was like in the afterwards section, he sums up like his 3 main points from the book. And they're like, first one is it's like easy to disrupt the gifts of like making easy decisions, and understanding the true nature of instinctive decision making requires us to be forgiving of those trapped in circumstances where good judgment is implied. And then the last one is like the idea of less is more. And I don't know, for me I think that was like the most important one, like kind of in that scenario, like they didn't have to know all of the information to like make the changes that they needed to the product. They just need to know like that they liked it more, just like for some reasons they just like made what people liked so that they would buy it. I thought that was interesting.
I like what you said, sorry. I liked what you said about the less is more. One of my questions was actually, is there a better solution to train cops to make snap judgments in tight situations? And I think that less is more is key, because we do need to make sure that like they're trained and like they're ready for stressful situations. But I think it's important that they're also able to tune out unimportant information. Because I know for me, like sometimes I can get stressed out by like completely random things that I don't even realize are happening. Because maybe like something, and this is gonna sound like petty, like I'm a petty person, but like the lights are like way too bright, or like it's too hot, or like there's people like screaming in the background, or like there's too much going on. And so I think if we want them to be able to like stay calm, we need to like train them, or just like help them to develop a better sense of just like focusing and just zoning out like other things that could be heightening their heart rate or that kind of thing. Because like in that kind of a situation, there could be so many things like going crazy, but if they can just focus and just like tune out everything else, I think that'd be a big step.
I actually also had that same question.
Oh.
And there was one quote that I really liked, and it said, "This is the gift of training and expertise, the ability to extract an enormous amount of meaningful information from the very thinnest slice of experience. To a novice, that incident would have gone by in a blur, but it wasn't a blur at all. Every moment, every blink is composed of a series of discrete moving parts, and every one of those parts offers an opportunity for intervention, for reform, and for correction." So I just thought that it was really cool that when they had people gain more experience and get used to being in highly stressful situations so that their heart rate does go down and they're operating in the like peak performance section, then officers aren't as stressed and they can still be making rational decisions.
Well, it makes me wonder too, like when they go in, it makes me wonder how like they're thinking about the situation changes the more times they do it. Because obviously in their head they're not like gonna walk into like a burning building and be like, ugh, not this again.
Yeah.
But like just like their subconscious thinking about the situation, I think probably changed. And it's just interesting to think about it in that perspective.
I like what like both of you said about like the less is more, because it made me think about where it talks about the Roos, like he's the police officer, and when they're like doing the car chase, or there's a guy, and there's the guy, I think he's the guy in the car, but there's a police officer, and he shoots this guy in the car for speeding, and it like doesn't even register in his head, like the high speed of the chase doesn't even register in his head that this man had never even gone over 70 miles an hour, and like he just like his unconscious bias is like associated with like this is a black young guy who's speeding, like he must be a criminal. And the other thing they talk about is like there's 3 people in the car. So then it starts to talk about like what if we just have one officer in the car? Like there's less like
Less stuff going on.
yeah, and there's less like cases and things like that happening. Like in here, like in the book, where'd it go? I'll find it. But it's like it talks about how like if there had been one officer, like just one officer in the car, that wouldn't have happened. Like all 3 of them running into the car, like all like heightened all of their senses, and so they all were like making drastic choices, and they weren't even like realizing that. Like if it had just been him in the car, he would have like called in for backup, and he would have had time to like slow down, and his thought process would have been more clear, and then like the situation would have been resolved in a more like ethical way.
Yeah, you actually just answered another one of my questions. It was what caused the officers to overreact, and it was just because they were way overstimulated because there were so many of them in that car.
I found it. It says it was this false safety in numbers that gave the 3 officers, the bravado to rush the car. We've got to slow the situation down. We train people that time is on their side. In the Bruce case, lawyers for the other side were saying that this was a fast-breaking situation, but it was only fast-breaking because the cops let it become one. He was stopped, he wasn't going anywhere. So all I had to do was try to run away. No, you did.
So, one of my questions was, what are some of the possible outcomes or results that could happen if people got rid of, like, their biases or, like, anything like that, which kind of goes along with what you guys were saying about, like, they didn't even, like, register that it was, like, he wasn't going that fast, right?
Yeah.
Or that he wasn't really showing any signs of, like, aggression. He just was like, oh, this is, like, a young black man, he's probably, like, trying to, right? So, one of the parts in the book was talking about how, like, different states have different, like, black men and white men have different chances of getting sent to prison for, like, drug abuse. And so one of the parts says, in 10 states, black men are sent to state prison on drug charges at rates that are 26 to 57 times greater than those of white men. What if we put and then it, like, so that's just showing that, like how big of a difference is it, but then it goes in to say, like, what if we put screens in courtrooms and, like, the accused criminal wouldn't be in the courtroom at all, so that, like, just shows, it's like tying back to, like, they put a screen in, like, that orchestra thing, but, like, if, like, the judges couldn't see what they looked like, or they didn't know about, like, their background and stuff like that, if it would be, like, a more fair place, like, people would have a better chance of having a better outcome just because of those unconscious biases that we don't even know we have. Like, if they couldn't see them, maybe that would help, like, with that problem. I thought it was interesting.
This is our choose your own conclusion analysis, like a plot hole, or like what's like an error that the author made, that you like wish like you could like fix, like if you could talk to.
I don't know, mine's not really like an error, but like just in general, like I think when we first got the book, I was like under the impression that we'd be like learning more about like how to make decisions or like how to change the way we think.
Yeah.
But like it didn't really talk about that, and we just talked about how like your brain works instead of what we can do to fix that. And like it kind of goes along with one of my questions, and it says like just what was like the main idea of the book, like in general, or just like what did you want us to get from it, and like what we have is once we know about our mind, about how our mind works, and about the strengths and weaknesses of human judgment, it is our responsibility to act. And he says that at the end, and I kind of just think like I wish that in the book he would have talked a little more about what we need to do to act instead of just telling us how our mind works. But I don't know.
And there's a couple times where like he tried to get there, and he was like 3/4 the way there, but he was just not quite there, and so it just wasn't quite as fulfilling as it would have been.
I found like all the stories and all the statistics and tests very interesting, but I also kind of wish that like after he would tell a story or a test, like within the same area, he would be like, and this can be like what we learned from this test is you can apply it this way, like you can use the information and apply it this way, because it's kind of like it's a self-help book, but like
you read it, but you don't really know how to like help yourself afterwards.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's no like instructions on like this is what you should do.
That's what I was thinking too, because I was under the same impression that like we'd learn about like what our unconscious minds like how they worked, and then he would tell us how to like fix it. And on page 276, he like it's almost what Jacoby said. Like he almost get there. He says one of the questions that I've been asked over and over again since Blink came out is when should we trust our instincts and when should we consciously think things through. Well, here's the partial answer. On a straightforward choices, deliberate analysis is best. When questions of analysis and personal choices start to get complicated, when we have to juggle many different variables, then our unconscious thought processes may be superior. And I feel like that gives us like kind of half an answer. But then I feel like he also goes in like later in that paragraph and he's like, but that only works like some of the time, you know? And so like maybe he can tell us how to get rid of the biases or just like more of an answer like when we should actually trust. I feel like that would have been helpful if we had gotten it.
I said most of the same thing. I wish he had just included more of how we can avoid making incorrect judgments. One of the other questions was, why do I think the author chose to do this? And last week I was looking at the reviews for the book, and I saw like a statement that he had made in response to someone's critique. And a lot of people said that his book was like really oversimplified.
Mm-hmm.
And in response to that, he was like, if you think it's oversimplified, this book isn't for you. This book is just so you can like be introduced to like the psychology and not go from 0 to 60, I guess. His goal is just to get people interested in the topics in the book. And so I think the reason why he might not talk about that as much is so that people are like looking further and going farther with those ideas after reading his book.
The starting point, he wants you to like, if it intrigues you, then like you like go deeper into it. Because a lot of times, if it's like very deep, like people are gonna get lost. And so like, if they want to know more, then they can. But the first time you read something that goes way too into depth, you're like, oh, you lost me. You know, like I don't understand.
One of my last questions was just like, what are the underlying themes of this section?
Yeah.
And it was talking about like mind blindness and like, but at the end he was talking about like using it like to an advantage and using it for like problem solving. And I think that's, I don't know, like I feel like he could have gone into more depth with that part, but I also like what you guys were saying, if this book was all about like really in depth, I would have like never gone through it. I would not. I couldn't have, because I hate reading like textbooks where you're like, no. So I think he did do a good balance of like helping us out, but also like making it readable.
Well, yeah. I had a question, like I was like with what you said about like mind blind, like it just made me think like how he talks about how autistic people are mind blind, like, but what can we take from like what they do? Because there might be certain things that we could actually like learn from, because on how like they like you evaluate like certain situations. So like, you know, maybe some of the things he doesn't directly like say, like maybe like you could like look at like mind blindness and like mind reading and see like how it applies to you. But he kind of like puts it in there because like Peter viewed the world very differently than everybody else did. But like, what are the benefits of that? You know?
Yeah, I'm gonna skip back for just a second, but if I were to play the devil's advocate for the author, I think, because in psychology, when we fill out like our daily reflections, we have to answer the question, how does your thinking about thinking change?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of just how this book is. Like, as much as we want it to be like an exact step-by-step on how to fix it, I feel like it's not quite that simple to change thinking. It's just something that you just kind of have to bring to conscious awareness and just like think it over and just like look at yourself. And yeah, I'm gonna say it again, but just think it through.
Okay.
So the end
I think
Thank
we're
you
good.
for listening to our final podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yay. So fun.